Breathing correctly is a big part of singing, and you will undoubtedly have inhales and exhales along with the actual singing on any vocal recording you make. Depending on your stylistic decisions, you may need to reduce, remove, or sometimes even add breaths to make your vocal part work in the context of your song. Once you've made your final comp, there will be mouth noises and even some stray plosives or low-frequency hits during B or P syllables. Let's go over some techniques on how to deal with breaths, mouth noises, and plosives to make your vocal edit clean without sounding unnatural. So here's our final comp in Logic. I'm showing all of the comped parts, but I can close the disclosure triangle to show the final comped track. Let me solo this comped track and let's listen to how it sounds. Again, this is completely unedited, so you're going to hear mouth noises and maybe doubled up breaths and things like that in between all the edits. So I'm going to go ahead and solo the lead vocal, make it a little bigger so we can see it, and here's what it sounds like now.
La 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 la. Ooh. Give me a kiss before you say goodbye, but make it quick.
So as you can hear, we have a lot of mouth noises and things that we're going to want to get rid of. We don't want to leave any of that stuff in there. The thing to remember here is when we mix this vocal into the final song, we're going to be using compression and EQ, things that can actually even bring out the lower volume sounds like mouth noise and breaths and that sort of thing. Plus, when we make our comps, you'll probably hear in some other sections, when we make our comps, you're going to have doubled up breaths between parts. Like,
only would
see if I can find one of those.
The storm is.
So you're hearing sort of a breath on the outside of this pre-chorus going into the new chorus. Since it's from a different take, it just sounds like an awkward breath. We're going to have to clean those up. And then you'll find breaths that are just a bit too loud or unnatural because she was really taking in a big breath before a line. And we're going to want to reduce or even possibly remove those types of breaths. So let's take a listen.
I will dance in the rain. The storm.
So like right there, I mean, that breath is a big, deep inhale. It's a little unnatural.
The rain.
It's a real gasp, right? So things like that we're going to want to take out. The way to deal with breaths is you have to take them on a case-by-case basis. So sometimes a breath will sound natural, and you may need to just reduce its volume. Other times a breath, like this one, will sound too much, too dramatic, or unnatural, and you may need to remove that. So it's really up to your style, which you'll develop as you work on recording and editing vocals, but there's no right or wrong. Take all breaths out or leave all breaths in. You really have to take them on a case-by-case basis, and in the end, you want something that sounds as natural as possible. So let's start working on this a little bit. Now, the thing I like to do first is to using our comp take, I like to leave that alone and actually export our comp to a new track in Logic. And the way to do this is you can click on the little A icon, gives us a context menu for our comping. And here I can choose to export active comp to a new track. And that'll just take all our decisions and put it on a flattened track where I don't have access to the other parts, but now I can do a bit of editing here. So then I just take the original one and I just mute it and make it real nice and small. And now this will be my sort of master track that I can do my editing on here. Instead of calling it Audio 7, let's call it Lead Vocal. And this is where we'll perform our edits, knowing that we can always get back to the individual comps from the other tracks in our muted track up here. So I'm going to get to work here. Now, the three main tools you're going to use are your trimming tool, your marquee selection to make selections and delete things, and then your fading. So your fades are going to be super important. Anytime you make an edit, you're going to want to fade up into and out of that edit so that you don't hear any discrepancies or pops or anything like that. So starting with my pointer tool, I can get my trimmer tool just by going to the left edge, and I can go ahead and just edit out. Whoops, I want to make sure I don't have all of the regions selected. I only want this region selected. And zooming in a bit, take our trimmer tool, and I'm just going to get rid of any of those unused mouth noises. Now notice the snapping is going to cause me problems here. So I want to go up to my snap modes here. Instead of bar, which it was set to, I want to snap to the highest resolution possible, which is in this case samples, and that'll allow me to make really fine edits. Go ahead and I'm going to edit out as much of that initial mouth noise as possible. And here again, I want to fade in. And so to do that, I'll type T to get my tool palette, and then I can use the other key command A once I'm here, or just click on Fade Tool, make a little selection, and pull in my very short fade, but just something that allows it to come in seamlessly. So it'll sound like this. I want to make sure I have the lead vocal soloed as I'm working on this so I can hear everything. Okay, so moving on. So that breath there is pretty natural. I would leave, in this case, I would leave that breath. Got some mouth noise there. So in this case, I need to go back to my pointer tool. And notice I have my main tool and my secondary tool is the marquee. So when you have that set up that way, I can type command to get my secondary tool. And here I'm going to make a selection over this area where the mouth noise was. And just click once to make it a separate region and delete it. And then I'll go back to T and then A for my fade tool, make a fade out of this. Going over here, we'd make a selection and a fade in, and we want to just listen to this edit and make sure it sounds good. So there is a breath coming in there, and this time you can actually use the fade to just give that breath a little bit of an attenuation. So we'll still hear the breath, but it'll be a little bit quieter because we're fading into it. That sounds nice and natural. So that breath is quite big, and in this case, I'll show you, sometimes it's easy and sounds natural just to go ahead and get rid of a breath like that. Just take it out. Again, you want to make your fades. You always have to make your fades coming in and out of things, and then once you make an edit, it's always good to go back and listen. There we go. So there's some breath noise coming up. So it's very detailed work, but it's definitely worth the time to go in and just take care of all these little sections, all these little edits across every word and every phrase, and just make sure everything is sounding as natural as possible. And in the end, it'll help you mix because you'll really be able to hear the vocal as clear as it can be, and you won't be getting massive breath inhales and exhales due to when you're using compression, bringing that stuff out. So you want to go ahead and put this work in now and get a really nice edit, make sure everything's in place. Now here's a case in this vocal performance where, so that breath is going to remove that breath.
I know it's
so right here, I noticed there's something.
I wish you'd stay if you only would. I'm tougher than
There's something here.
Quick before I start to cry.
Okay, so right before I start to cry, there's a breath that's actually rhythmically a little strange. If you listen to it. So it comes in and there's like almost a pause. So some cases you may need to actually move breaths around to feel a little bit more musical. So in this case, it's simple. You can just go ahead using the marquee tool. I'll make a selection around the breath, and then I'll actually move it just over a little bit. So you can do stuff like this where you just sort of fine tune where breaths happen to make them a little bit more natural. So something like that, as soon as I put the crossfades in, it'll make a little more sense. And it's just rhythmically, you may need to fine tune them. Again, sometimes you even need to take a breath from somewhere else and add that in a place where there isn't a breath, just to make it sound natural. So something like that might work. Now, one other trick I want to show you is, in this case, I like where the breath is now, but it's a little loud. So you can actually use region automation to just make a breath a little bit quieter than everything else. So to get into region automation, you would type the A button, And instead of doing track automation, which is a global track volume, we can click here and choose region automation. And then you can go region by region and actually select, by clicking once, a individual volume control over just this little region here. And we can pull that level of that down. Now, I noticed it did it to everything for some reason. We want to bring those back to 0, which is where they were. Go ahead and do that. I don't know why it pulled everything down. It should just pull the one region down.
But make it quick.
So there we go.
Before I start.
There we go. So that sounds more natural to me. Just about 7 decibels or 6.9 decibels down on that breath, and then it returns to the original volume. And it just gets it to, you feel the breath, you know it's there, but it doesn't have to be as loud as everything else. So once you do all of your editing work, here's our final comp. This has all the breaths and mouth noises removed here. Now I want to show you one other thing you want to be conscious of besides breaths, and that's any kind of plosive noises. So I have a marker dropped here in the first chorus. I want to play something for you, and this is an example of a plosive that we're going to also want to take care of in addition to the breaths we've been working on. Okay, so in the context of the music, it doesn't sound that bad. Let me solo it up for you, and you can really hear what's going on. It's the word pain. So it doesn't sound that bad, but if you really listen, it's got a lot of low energy right on the P. And again, once you start to compress or do other processing with the vocal, that might stand out in a mix and it's going to conflict with other instruments. It's not necessary for the clarity of the vocal. So we want to go ahead, and this is another thing we want to do as we're editing our comp, is get rid of anything like that. So if I zoom in really close to the waveform, you can actually visually see a very large waveform indicating that there's a lot of low energy right at that moment. Let me play it for you again. Okay, so it's right on that P. Now this is actually pretty easy to take care of. Again, this buildup of low energy isn't really crucial for us to hear the integrity of that syllable. So all we need to do in this case is to go ahead and take our marquee tool and just edit out very closely only the area of the P that has the low energy. So I'll just type delete there. And if you want to even grab an earlier section, there might be some information here earlier than the low frequency pop. So I can actually double click and bring this over, edit it in there, and I'll crossfade. It's very important to make it seamless between the edit. And then let's take a listen. Okay, so we've just removed the low component of the P, but it's still here. We still hear it as a P. So you want to go through and make sure that you've taken care of any plosives as well. And once we have the final edit, as you can see, there's crossfades on every edit, tons of editing visible once you're finished with it. And if you have the exercise files and you listen through, you'll hear that I left some of the natural sounding breaths and removed everything else, including mouth noise and popping or any plosive sounds. These are the small details that are really important to make your vocal production as accessible as possible to the listener and as easy to mix once you bring it in with the other tracks.